So in this video, I'm going to show you how to build a GPU mining rig. I'm going to go over the parts I used in assembling the mining rig all together. Now this is assuming you have all the parts already and you just need to start building the rig. And definitely check out my other videos if you want to start mining or the setup process. So thanks for tuning in. This is The Life of a Miner. Okay, so first I do want to mention that building a GPU mining rig is like building a regular computer, but all you're doing is adding additional GPUs on top. So if you know how to build a computer, you're basically 80% there. Okay, so first let's check out the parts I'm going to use to build a GPU mining rig. Now the thing about building a GPU mining rig is that you want to save as much money as possible so you can break even sooner. So you basically can go cheap on every part except for the GPU because that will determine your profits, and you don't want to go cheap on a power supply because cheap power supplies have a high chance to fail. But for all the other parts, you can go as cheap as possible. Now this is going to be a 6 GPU mining rig, but I highly recommend to stick with either 6 GPUs or 8 GPUs on a mining rig because you will run into less issues compared to if you use more GPUs. So for the GPUs, I'm going to use 2 RTX 3090s, 2 RTX 3080s, and 2 RTX 3070s. Now all the RTX GPUs I'm going to use are non-LHR cards, meaning the hash rates won't be limited when mining Ethereum. So let's check this out. Now the motherboard I'm going to use will be a Gigabyte GA-H110-D3A motherboard. The only thing you want to check out with the motherboard is that it has enough PCIe slots to add more GPUs. Now you do not need to specifically get a mining motherboard because they may be really expensive. Most gaming motherboards will have 5 to 6 PCIe slots, and you can always add a PCIe extender to add more PCIe slots if needed. And make sure when you check out the PCIe slots from the motherboard, it has either a 16x slot or a 1x slot. An 8x slot will not work with GPUs. Now for the CPU and RAM, just make sure it's compatible with the motherboard. So I will be using an Intel Pentium LGA 1151 CPU, and the RAM will be an 8GB DDR4 memory. And you will also need some thermal paste for the CPU, and I'll be using a CPU cooler that came with the CPU. For the hard drive, I'll be using a 256GB SSD SATA M.2, and I recommend to get at least a 120GB hard drive to have enough room to download Windows and increase the virtual memory if you plan to use Windows. And we do need a power cord to turn on the motherboard. So for the power supply, I'm going to use 2 EVGA 1300 watt power supply. And like I mentioned before, you don't want to go cheap on your power supply. So getting a good brand power supply is ideally worth it. Now since I'm not going to have enough cables for my GPUs from the power supplies, I'm going to use some adapters for additional cables so I can power all my GPUs. I'm also going to use a add to PSU so I can connect 2 power supplies to my mining rig. For the Pcie Risers, I'm going to use 6 version 008S Pcie Risers. Now typically all the version risers are similar, but getting newer versions will be slightly better. And for the mining rig frame, I'm going to use a 6 GPU Veta mining rig frame to assemble everything together. So now let's start building the GPU mining rig. So starting with the motherboard, let's insert the CPU. So for an Intel motherboard, you'll see a lever and you want to unhook it and raise it up so the CPU can be inserted in the motherboard. Go ahead and grab your CPU and you want to align the triangle symbol on the bottom left to the triangle symbol on the motherboard and drop it in. Then you want to lower the lever and hook it back up like before. Now lowering the lever with the CPU may feel like you're adding too much pressure or even breaking the motherboard, but that is normal and that's how it's done. Next you want to apply some thermal paste on top of the CPU, and this is the thermal paste I'm going to use. All you need is a raindrop size amount of thermal paste for the CPU. When putting on the CPU cooler, it will spread out the thermal paste automatically. Next, you want to put on the CPU cooler. All you have to do is line up the 4 pins on the corner of the CPU cooler to the 4 holes around the CPU. And then you want to push the 4 pins from the CPU cooler in the motherboard until you hear a click. And then go ahead and connect the CPU fan connector to the motherboard like so. Next, you want to add the RAM to your motherboard. All you need to make sure is that the bottom of the RAM is matched with the RAM slot with the motherboard and insert it in. Press firmly until you feel it click into the motherboard. Next, I'm going to add the M.2 hard drive to the motherboard. First, I'm going to unscrew the tiny screw so I can insert the M.2 hard drive. Once I insert the M.2 hard drive into the motherboard, like so, you want to screw the tiny screw back in to hold down the M.2 hard drive down. And that's pretty much how to set up the motherboard. Now this is an important step before adding everything to the mining rig frame. You first want to make sure the computer posts before doing anything more, because if you have an issue, you'll know it's going to be one of the basic parts and you won't need to disassemble the whole mining rig frame to figure it out, and you'll save a lot of time. So with this power supply, I'm going to only use the cables that are needed to power the motherboard and a GPU. And this is pretty much how everything is connected. And then go ahead and plug in your power cord to the motherboard like so you can turn on your motherboard. Let's go ahead and flip the power supply switch to on. And then push the power button and turn it on. As you can see, the motherboard did post, so we can now start putting everything together in the mining rig frame. So first, let's add the motherboard to the mining rig frame. I'm going to screw all the screws that are required, but not tighten them all up until I have all the required screws in. So let's check this out. Next, I went ahead and added the power supplies to the mining rig frame. Now I'm going to remove the fans on the back of this mining rig frame because the GPUs are actually too big to fit with the fans and the fans are in the way. Next, I'm going to add the GPUs to the mining rig frame. Now I'm going to split the GPUs power evenly with the power supplies. So I will have one 3090, one 3080, and one 3070 connected to each of the power supply. So let's check this out. Now I'm going to show you how to connect the power cables to the power supply. Now these parts are extra parts I have, so this is not going to be added to the GPU mining rig, and it's just for an example. So for a modular power supply, make sure you connect the right ends to the power supply. So for the motherboard power, you want to connect the two connectors to the power supply like so. And for this power supply, it has two CPU spots, and you can choose either one to connect to the CPU power cord. And for the VGA cord, make sure you connect the 8 pin to the power supply, and the 6+2 pin will be connected to the GPUs. And since this power supply has a 6 pin with an 8 pin, I'm going to use a dual 6 pin adapter and convert it to an 8 pin so the GPU can be fully powered. And this is how to insert the power cords to the GPUs that require 3 8-pin connectors. Now back to the GPU mining rig, let's go ahead and add the power cords to the power supply and the motherboard. I went ahead and plugged the power cords to the power supply and the motherboard. Let's go ahead and now connect the GPUs to the power supply. I went ahead and connected 3 GPUs to the power supply and it will look something like this. Now I'm going to use 2 Molex and one 6+2 pin connector from each power supply to connect to the PCIe risers. And I'm also going to use one SATA connector to connect the add to PSU for a dual power supply setup. Now I went ahead and connected the second power supply to all the remaining GPUs. Next, I connected the SATA connector from the first power supply and then the motherboard connector from the second power supply to the add to PSU, so both power supplies will be turned on at once. Next, I went ahead and connected the power cords to the PCIe risers to power the risers, which I'm using 4 Molex connectors and 2 6-pin connectors for the risers. Now it is recommended to either use a Molex or a 6-pin connector to power the risers. But if you have a low powered card like a GTX 1060, then a SATA cable will be okay. Just make sure you're only using one SATA cable per strand and make sure it is a low powered card. Next, I'm going to show you how to connect the PCIe risers to your GPU. Just make sure you align the connection on the bottom of the GPU and insert the riser in. Then go ahead and clip the risers from the back to make sure it's secured. The end of the PCIe risers will be a 1x PCIe plug that can fit into a motherboard 16x slot or a 1x slot like so. Just be aware that the GPUs will not work with a 8x PCIe slot. And there you have it, the whole 6 GPU mining rig is completed, and this is how the cables will look from the back. And this is the front of the mining rig with everything connected, so let's check this out. Okay, so now let's go ahead and turn on the completed mining rig. So first, let's turn on the power supplies. And then hit the power button. Now doing some quick motherboard BIOS tuning, you can see all the GPUs are connected to the motherboard. And really quickly, I'm going to show you the GPU mining rig mining Ethereum. And as you can see, the 3090s are getting around 122 mega hashes, the 3080s are getting around 102 mega hashes, and the 3070s are getting around 63 mega hashes mining Ethereum. Alright, so thanks for checking out my guide on how to build a GPU mining rig. I do have other guides on the startup, how to overclock, and how to mine Ethereum as well. So definitely check out my channel if you want to check them out. And if you have any questions you want to ask me live, I do stream live on Twitch at twitch.tv/thelifeofminer every Sunday 4:30 p.m. US Eastern Time. And if you do need any type of help, definitely join the Discord. I or someone knowledgeable will definitely help you out. Okay, so hope you enjoyed this video. Thumbs if you enjoyed it, sub if you're excited to see what's next. But of course, thanks for watching, and always, happy mining.
Thanks for watching The Life of a Miner. This is Gohan from Dragon Ball Z. You don't want me to get angry and turn Super Saiyan, so make sure you subscribe to The Life of a Miner. I'm also the narrator. Next time on The Life of a Miner.